I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernigo.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Ditloff.
Folks, we're working through a big Lent theme, and we're going to get there in this episode. Last week, we talked about temptation. The week before, we talked about fasting in sort of a political register. I don't know. This week, we're going to talk about almsgiving and charity and how that kind of works itself out politically, or maybe kind of like the critique that we have to bring to it. And we'll get there in a minute. But before we get there, we have to talk about something else. It's so important. Maybe this fits into the Lenten theme in the sense that this article that we're about to talk about is the anti-Lent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the anti-Lent is right. You've probably seen the article going around Twitter. Matt sent it to me. I thought it was very funny. It is in Christianity Today, and the headline is $100 billion ad campaign aims to make Jesus the, quote, biggest brand in your city. And the little tagline here is, he gets us. An effort to attract skeptics and cultural Christians launches nationally this month, so do be prepared, I guess.
That's right.
But Christians still have questions about how the church markets faith. So, that's right. Right in the middle of Lent, you've given up enough. You aren't eating meat on Fridays, and they're going to drop this on you this month. Can you believe it? It's pretty rough.
I think that it's already hard enough to give things up for Lent, and then this happens, and it just seems impossible. It just seems impossible to continue on with life in general when people are doing this kind of thing.
If they did the Gospels today and Jesus was out there in the desert, this would be a temptation of the devil, right? Like, the devil would come up to him and be like, listen, I can make you the biggest brand in every city.
That's exactly it. And you know what? Honestly, if you read the website that they've created, the hegetsus.org or .com, whichever it is, it reads that way.
Yeah, it's true.
100% a temptation to make Jesus very cool and then miss the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are going to talk about this for a minute because we have to. Normally we would save something like this for the lock-in, which is a Behind the Paywall podcast where we just talk about goofy stuff going on in Christian culture and current events and so on. But we thought it's Lent, and what a perfect thing to sort of dig into for the almsgiving episode, sort of the opposite of almsgiving, alms-taking. Is that what this might be? So here's the short of it. All right, it's what it sounds like. There is a $100 million ad campaign by this big marketing team that is going to target you, dear listener, if you're a millennial or a Gen Zer or one of them at heart, I guess. This marketing campaign is coming from you. It is coming from the Michigan-based marketing agency Haven. And in it, each ad focuses on an aspect of Jesus' earthly experience with which today's "the struggle is real" crowd might resonate. Jesus was judged too. And Jesus had fun with his friends, too.
Jesus is always doing that. In the Gospels, it's like, oh, Jesus, I guess think about it like this, right? Jesus is asleep on that boat in the tumultuous sea, and then he wakes up, and that's fun. That's him having fun with his friends. He's just out there on the boat.
Yeah, and like when he went to that big kegger and turned all the water into wine.
That's fun.
And he was always partying, that Jesus.
That was with his mom, but, I guess that's fun.
True. You can have a cool mom.
You can have a cool mom. You can drink with your cool mom. You can turn a lot of water into wine with your cool mom at a cool party. That's fun. Jesus is just like you. You're doing that all the time, right? Okay, so the whole thing is absolutely bonkers. It's bad. It's obscene that you would give $100 million to make Jesus cool. I feel like that misses the point so hard. Here's a quote from the article, though, that I think sort of like encapsulates the whole push really well. It goes like this. Despite disagreements about tactics or even the content, the He Gets Us team is confident that they're starting where every successful ad campaign starts, with a good product. These people need to fear God more. Market research said McKendry, who's the guy behind the team, found skeptics were more likely to be convinced their values lined up with Jesus than with other religious figures like Muhammad and Buddha. So that's it. That's why we got Jesus out on the table, because Jesus is, I guess, more likely to align with the values of skeptics than others. And I think that's, it's bananas. It's off the wall. What are they doing?
He's just the superior product. That's all there is to it.
Jesus is a superior product. He's just like you and your friends having a great time. There's a video on it's embedded in the article, but it's also on their website. And it's just like, it's so bonkers. It's just like, Jesus's friends are a bunch of troublemakers that got arrested, which sounds cool on this face, but then it's not like, and then you should do it too or something. Yeah. It's like, think about it. I don't know. That's it. There's no real substance to it. It's just like, you should think about Jesus a little bit more. And he was a cool guy. And like you would hang out with him if you could. Jesus would totally play Halo with you. But like, there's nothing at the bottom of it.
Yeah, every single one of these is basically like a video or something. Like, so there's a number of different like themes, I guess, of the ads, and everyone could just end with like, Jesus, ever heard of him? And that would be fine. Like that's basically the substance of the whole thing.
There's an article on the website that like, okay, so the article, the website is laid out like this. There's just a bunch of articles that kind of like correspond to the larger like themes in Jesus' life. There's one about like him getting arrested. There's one about like sex workers, and there's one about being angry and frustrated. There's one about financial struggles, and each one is like vaguely correct. Like the arrested article. The arrested article says, Jesus was arrested, and that was really hard. And if you're a person that was arrested, I bet you could turn your story of struggle into one that's very hopeful. And it's like, okay, but what do you have to say about the system that arrested me? What do you have to say about the reason why 2 million people in the United States are incarcerated? Nothing. I think that Jesus, who is, of course, the superior brand to everything else in the entire world, probably would have something to actually say rather than just sort of like vague platitudes about, I don't know, being cool and edgy.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is very funny. The Nike of religion is here. I do love, though, there's one little segment that's like, struggling financially. That's kind of the theme of it, and they talk about how Jesus also struggled financially his whole life, struggled to put food on his table.
It's a wild way to put that, though.
It really is, but it's especially wild because the ad campaign is, let's remind you, $100 million.
Are you struggling financially? Well, we could have used this money to like, I don't know, erase your medical debt or something, but instead we needed to convince everyone that Jesus is very cool. It's such a bizarre thing to me, though, because it's like in the United States, in North America, is there really a single person who doesn't like have a sort of cursory knowledge of what Jesus is about? It's hard for me to believe. It's hard for me to believe
this is
never
necessary,
heard of him. Right?
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? All right, I'll just give them a free idea. This is an even better ad campaign. Imagine if they had taken like $75 million and they just like used it to, I don't know, like buy a bunch of poor people stuff or whatever, and then they took $25 million and just told everybody about it for like 3 years. It would be a way better ad campaign, I think.
You could with $25 million, think of all the people you could pay just to post about all the cool things you've done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what they need to do. Spread this money out. Find some like social media click farms, in the global south. I mean, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. I mean, instead,
that is the nature of marketing.
They're going to blow $100 million on TV ads and like billboards, two things that millennials and Gen Z love to look at. We love our TV. We love our billboards. Get them in front of our faces.
So there you have it, folks. He Gets Us. It's the nega Lent, the bizarro Lent, the bad thing that shouldn't be happening during Lent, the opposite of fasting, whatever that is, too much consuming, I guess. But let's talk instead about why we're really here, which is almsgiving. It is that good spiritual disciplinary time of Lent. The struggle is real. and these ads don't resonate with me, but the almsgiving theme actually kind of is. So let's get into it. Like Matt said, we've been talking about Lent, temptation, fasting, etc. Now we're going to get into sort of almsgiving and charity more broadly. Lent is a time when Christians are called to think about the poor and those who are suffering around the world and how we can work to alleviate that suffering. It's an important part of Lent, something that maybe I didn't hear too much about growing up, but also I can remember hearing some of it. There are, just in the United States, 140 million poor and low-income people, and moving around a little bit of money here and there for those folks is fine, but moving around that money also doesn't fundamentally disrupt the systems of exploitation that made those millions of people poor in the first place. And if we try to zoom out even further, to the global south or something like that, you're going to add millions and millions more on top of that. So when we talk about something like charity or almsgiving, I think Lent gives us this really interesting opportunity to reflect on what those ideas in the Christian tradition do for us, maybe what their limitations are, and if there are some other ways we could sort of interpret them or maybe deepen their meaning for us in a political register.
Yeah, I think so. That sounds like a really cool thing to talk about. I'm excited to do it. Yeah. So on the one hand, just like you said, Dean, charity alone is great. It's fine. Giving people money, I recommend it highly.
You got to do it.
You got to do it. But also we can use money to actually build institutions and bases of power so that we can actually, resolve those central contradictions of capitalism. I think that you can't be afraid of fundraising. You can't be afraid of, getting people to give money to particular organizations or causes, because at the end of the day, very powerful and also very stupid political elites and their corporate backers, they're not afraid to do it. They're not afraid to be organized. And in fact, they are extremely organized. The left or a real anti-capitalist struggle or whatever, right? It's not going to be able to oppose those very organized bourgeois structures without money, without that type of giving. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's a place that we can end up, and then we can start talking about charity first. Does that sound okay, Dean?
I think so. Yep. So maybe one way into this is to start with a slogan that I really like, that I heard first actually in the Christian Solidarity movement, but it has some roots in the mutual aid kind of tradition, and it is solidarity, not charity. And I like it a lot because, like you were saying, Matt, charity is fine and it's good. And I think we'll kind of expand also our definition of charity as we go here. So I don't want to get down on the concept. Solidarity, not charity. It's a little bit truncated. But what it's getting at is the idea that what we should really be doing is building these kind of relationships of mutual aid, relationships of solidarity that don't rely on, giving somebody, meeting their immediate needs once and then never again, right? It's about building those deeper connections, deeper relations, and so on. But I think what I like most about it is that it already sort of points us in the direction of thinking about why charity in the first place. Why do we need to do charity? Why is there a reason for it? What's the cause of something like poverty and all that kind of stuff? So maybe we can just start on that part. The short answer is capitalism. We've been gesturing toward that already, but how can we spin this out a little more, do you think, Matt? I mean, why do we even need to be charitable during Lent at all?
Yeah, totally. So this is such a weird poll, but okay, I've been reading this book. This would not be an episode of our podcast unless I was telling you about a book I was reading. I've been reading this book that is extremely interesting, and I really like it, but at the same time, it is pretty strange. It's called A Commentary on the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, and it's written by the Christians for National Liberation in the Philippines. Okay. It is an interesting book because it's a group of communist Christians who were literally writing about social doctrine, and that's cool. But it's also weird because it centers completely on the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is a thing that's fine. I mean, whatever. I don't know who this book's for. Who are they trying to win over? I don't really know. But needless to say, I am won over personally. And so I guess maybe it's written for me. But anyways, they spend a lot of time in one of the early chapters talking about the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, the social teaching of the Catholic Church around the rich and the poor, right? They have these two classes in society. And Dean, you can tell me I'm wrong if I'm not putting it just right here, because you know more about it than I do. But fundamentally, the social teaching of the Catholic Church says that, like, well, the rich and the poor, like, it sucks, but they shouldn't be opposed to one another, right? They should work sort of harmoniously together, and they should find a way to cooperate. This is from a quote from the compendium. The poor should work for the rich, and the rich would use their private property to give enough sustenance to the poor. A cool idea that if that happened, I guess class harmony would be more of like a viable idea. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. The poor do work for the rich. That's true. But the rich don't in turn use their private property or the gains from that wealth to give sustenance to the poor, to reinvest in the workers. They don't do any of that. They barely even give people raises. And if you do, it's still like 3% or whatever. I'm not here to complain, but I'm just saying, like, rich people don't do this thing. They don't use their private property to give enough sustenance to the poor. So, like, that where that leaves us is not class harmony, but class war. So the cooperation between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, it's not possible because the rich are, at least for the moment, far more organized in the whole structure of class war. They have far more power. They have, I think, a stronger sort of societal bond or whatever. I don't know how to say that exactly right, but what I'm saying is that the rich don't have to fork over that money to the poor because, like, the poor haven't made them yet. And in some ways, there have been small gains and shouldn't overlook those. But I guess, like, that's the fundamental problem here. That's the fundamental opposition in capitalism, that there are the wealthy, there are the people who own the means of production, and there are the people that work, or the lumpen, or depending on how, like, we want to stratify that class society. There are these two distinct poles, though, and the rich are not going to just sort of, like, be nice for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is a big piece of it, and Catholic social teaching is something that has certainly developed since Rerum Novarum in the late 19th century, the 1800s. Rerum Novarum is kind of the foundational encyclical for modern Catholic social teaching, and it is the one where we first really encountered this idea of class harmony, and it's intentionally a sort of competition, I think, with the socialist movement in the Industrial Revolution. So it's an interesting thing to read, and I think it's true. I wouldn't go to it for social theory, that's for sure. And Catholic social teaching, I think, over time has actually developed quite far beyond it. I mean, you don't find a lot of class harmony rhetoric, for instance, in the encyclicals of Pope Francis, totally. But neither did you really find it much in Pope Benedict. Didn't even talk about that kind of thing very much. It's sort of a framing device that has gone away. But it's still with us in lots of ways in the Catholic Church and in Catholic social teaching in general. And I think, it's true. Like, on the one hand, you're right, Matt, like, counting on the rich to sort of just obey their conscience and do their part and give sustenance to the poor is already a pretty naive thing to kind of hang your hopes on. But I think the other problem is that that way of thinking obscures how rich people get rich in the first place. So in capitalism, the whole idea is if you're a person who is rich, chances are you're rich because of the exploitation of somebody somewhere on the earth, right? If it's generational wealth, it's probably the result of generations of exploitation. If you're kind of a newly minted rich person, someplace there are working people that you employ who are getting the short end of the stick so that you can get more, right? That is the only way to really get rich, is to siphon up as much profits as you can from working people who you give less to, right? You kind of make these weird sovereign decisions as a rich person about who deserves to have money, and usually rich people decide that they are the ones that deserve to have money. That's right. And I think it's really important to think of it that way too, that, like, it's more than just issues of conscience and morality when we talk about capitalism. In fact, you can meet rich people that seem pretty nice. I mean, I've met plenty of rich folks, people with way more money than me, who are nice enough. I get on with them well. They're they're kind to me and so on. But at the end of the day, to amass that kind of fortune in the economy that we have, you can't do it without those exploitative relationships. So all that to say, when we talk about these contradictions in capitalism, these inequalities, it's really important to pay attention to those structuring injustices. Otherwise, we're always going to keep on targeting things at the wrong points.
Yeah, totally. You know, this is beyond just sort of like social teaching of like the Catholic Church or of any other church too, right? There are ways that people have ideologized thinking through like the stratification of classes and like saying, you know, it's sort of like it's good. Like, for example, it reminds me of this. There's an anthropologist named Oscar Lewis, who is a right-wing figure that people talk about every now and again, who he came up with this idea or this phrase called the culture of poverty in like, I don't know, the 60s or 70s or something. Anyways, it was an idea that the political right picked up because basically it was like, you know, there are things that poor people do that are unique to them that make them poor, right? They don't work particularly hard. They're lazy, all of these ideas, right? So, you know, the class stratification happens in all kinds of different ways, and people find all kinds of different ways of baptizing it as sort of logical or reasonable, where really it's not, right? It's systemic. So I guess all of that together kind of helps accentuate what the point is. That the point is that capitalism fundamentally necessitates that these two classes exist, that poverty exists, that like charity is necessary in the first place.
Yeah, and maybe to kind of keep going on this theme as well. So really what we're talking about right now is the contradiction between capital and workers for the most part. But when we talk about the poor or people who fall outside of the working class, we were just talking about working class sort of categorizations, you know, the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat. Sure. I think maybe even earlier this year. I think so. I can't remember now. But, you know, when we talk about the poor as kind of a big, broad category, that maybe includes some people who would be workers or proletarians, but also encompasses lots of other people who might not be, you know, who might be in other situations, especially when we think about global issues and global poverty and so on. That also creates a whole nother kind of nest of problems, right? And in those cases, the rich not only exploit the poor as sort of potential, you know, like potential markets, perhaps in some capitalist situations, but they also might exploit them in all kinds of other ways, right? As maybe obstacles to potential wealth, as possible commodities on the labor market in the future, right? As people who could be written off and forgotten about. The fact of the matter is, there is more wealth in the world now than there has ever been in, you know, global history. And that wealth is every single day. Rich people choose not to use that to create other kinds of structures by which poor people aren't kept poor. So I think it's important to think of it that way too, that like the contradiction between labor and capital is a big complicated one, and we focus a lot of energy on it. But what I love so much about the tradition of liberation theology is that it even gives us a bigger view to say it's even beyond just the contradiction between labor and capital. It's like a whole economy that is built around exploiting, destroying, and excluding or ignoring the poor more broadly, which is an even bigger category.
Totally. Okay. So like Dean said, there's a lot to say about this. We could probably go on and on, but let's not for a hot second. Let's stop. something we don't do often. Let's stop. I mean, generally, right? Like even at this point, even complicating things so far and kind of laying things out as they are right now, it's pretty clear that like charity is kind of an idea that's in trouble. I think a little bit, right? Like if charity is a thing where you just like you give somebody some money and they can meet their immediate needs, that's fine. Again, nothing wrong with that. But like if charity is just that, then like I don't know, it's not changing the world. It's really like, you know, just a piece. It's a thing that you do. It's a small Band-Aid you can put over a big gaping wound. So I mean, if charity is something that we think of as disconnected or is in practice disconnected from the struggle of working people, of poor people, of, you know, however we want to talk about those like stratifications of class, then it could do some good, but fundamentally it leaves the core problem unchanged. And like it just like ends up sort of exacerbating the problem, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That you know, it leaves poor people there to be exploited continually, and then like, you know, people scrambling again to find more ways to like meet the needs of those poor people rather than like actually allocating money to eradicate poverty to stop the exploitation in the first place.
Yeah, and at worst, not only does it fail to really alleviate suffering, but it also eases the conscience of rich people to feel like they've paid their dues or they're giving back to a community that they've already stolen from, right? There's all these ways that charity actually functions ideologically as a way to keep these systems of inequality going.
Well, right, and then you can give charitably, and then it's a tax write-off for you, and that's great, huh?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So charity is a part of the big racket of capitalism.
Right.
I think, though, one thing that is important, though, I guess, is to see charity, I said earlier, as something we might be able to expand a little bit and try to think a little more broadly about. And I really actually appreciate the way Pope Francis talks about it in Fratelli Tutti, which was an encyclical he wrote in 2020, focusing on solidarity. So he says there is also a commanded love expressed in those acts of charity that spur people to create more sound institutions, more just regulations, more supportive structures. It follows that it is an equally indispensable act of love to strive to organize and structure society so that one's neighbor will not find themselves in poverty. It is an act of charity to assist someone suffering, but it is also an act of charity, even if we do not know that person, to work to change the social conditions that caused his or her suffering. If someone helps an elderly person cross a river, that is a fine act of charity. The politician, on the other hand, builds a bridge, and that too is an act of charity. While one person can help another by providing something to eat, the politician creates a job for that person and thus practices a lofty form of charity that ennobles his or her political activity. I think, obviously we could kind of complicate the role of the politician.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe that part, but that's okay.
I like to think about it in terms of a good people's government,
sure.
Right? You've listened to the communes, they said they want a bridge, and so, that's your act of charity is to kind of be that functionary. Anyway, that's how I like to put it together in my brain. But I think the real key here is to see charity as, like Pope Francis says, sure, it's an act of charity to, give somebody some assistance, but it's also an act of charity to change the social conditions that cause their suffering. And to try to see these two things as part of, you need to have both of them if you want to be authentically charitable, I think is actually a good impulse.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way of thinking about it. The Pope, as usual, is right, except when he's talking about charity, not like whether or not you should have kids or dogs. I don't know. That's a little bit of a hot topic maybe, but I think here this makes a lot of sense, right? That when charity actually addresses the real struggles of actual people, that's good. When it actually overturns the things that keep people in poverty, that's good. When you build a bridge, it's great. I guess I'm here for it. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Thinking of it in this more expansive way is pretty helpful. It definitely helps us get out of the it helps us get out of the problem of charity as sort of like a Band-Aid, and it lurches towards charity as transformational idea.
Yeah, I think, I said earlier, I like the slogan solidarity, not charity, and I still do. I think it's useful. But I think trying to think about what we mean by charity and trying to see it too as part of a much deeper Christian tradition that is older than capitalism is really important as well, right? Charity is a classic sort of Christian virtue and idea to talk about. It's something that arises out of Christianity's own mutual aid situation, right? Giving each according to their need, from each according to their ability. That's really kind of Christian charity in a meaningful sense. And I think about it a lot because, as I've said on this podcast before, I work for this organization called Development and Peace, which is part of a kind of global network called Caritas Internationalis, or Charity International, literally. But we always say, we don't describe ourselves as a charity. We describe ourselves as a solidarity movement. And what that means for us is we are, really embodying, I think, a deeper kind of Christian tradition of charity by especially sending resources from Canada, from the global north, to the global south, to people in Madagascar who are building agroecology villages for, food sustainability, or to land defenders in Honduras who are, fighting against big business encroaching on indigenous communities and so on. That is actually sort of the moment where solidarity and charity maybe come together in a way that's not mutually exclusive. They're of a piece, and you kind of have to, figure out how to hold them all together.
That makes a lot of sense. Development piece is so cool. I think it's good. I'm here for it. This whole thing makes me think a little bit of a Bible verse, which is great. I feel like I've been getting slowly back into the Bible lately, which is a weird thing. Sort of as a disaffected evangelical, all these Bible verses and all these languages, all these like biblical rhetorics are kind of floating in my brain from being a Bible quizzer as a youth, and they're all bubbling up in the weirdest ways now, maybe in the best ways. But yeah, I guess there's a pretty famous parable in Matthew called the sheep and the goats, where Jesus is kind of telling this parable about the people who paid attention to the least of these. Jesus says, I guess famously, this is the line that everyone knows, is that Jesus tells the disciples, he says this. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. But then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes? And then the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me. Right. And this is sort of like, this is a pretty communist Bible verse, honestly. And it's great. The thing that I kind of like, I always miss, or I think that, I miss for sure because I don't read the Bible enough, but also I think other people miss too, is that when Jesus is saying this in the parable, Jesus is not saying this to like individual people. He's saying this to like the nations, is what the Bible says. The nations are gathered before him. This is when he's like separating people from the shepherd. This is where he's separating the sheep from the goats, right? So this whole thing about like, when did you give me something to drink? When did you clothe me? When did you visit me in prison? This whole thing is not addressed to individual people as like that these are individual acts of charity that you should do. Though, they are. There's absolutely no reason you shouldn't think that. But they are also like, it's addressed to like sort of like the nation. It's addressed to this like larger political structure. And I think that's actually kind of important, and an important piece of the puzzle that, we can read it both ways. There's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from doing good things. Visit people in jail, give people who are thirsty water. That's good. Please do not hear me saying the opposite. It will weigh so heavily on my conscience if I even believe that for a second. But the point is that there's like, in this particular parable, right, the way that it's directed is not down at individuals, though it could be read that way, and that's fine. It's directed up at the political structures of a society that lets people go thirsty, naked, imprisoned, and so on. And I think that's that's going along with the Pope Francis's reading of Commanded Love, and I think that's good.
Yeah, it makes sense too of that liberation theology theme of collective salvation and collective sin, and not only liberation theology, actually it's in the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, right? That compendium actually has a lot to say about solidarity, and in its section on solidarity it talks about structural sin as being a key feature of Catholic social teaching, something a lot of Catholics, I guess, don't know or,
right.
or aren't interested in, but it's important too to see that there is a kind of collective judgment going on in the Bible, right? The Bible has this certainly an important role to play in our individual spirituality, etc., but it has a huge communal and collective thrust. That's like the whole sort of theme even of the Hebrew scriptures, right, is like a whole community getting judged over and over again, and delivered over and over again, and that doesn't really go away when you get into the New Testament or something. So important to kind of think about that when we think about charity and global structural economics and so on, especially when you read those kinds of parables about final judgments. It gets a little
totally
spooky.
Even in somewhere else in Matthew, I can't remember exactly where this is now. It's somewhere in there, though, I promise. Jesus does like he openly criticizes the like cities who don't believe that who don't repent. That's what it is. He goes there, he does all of the cool miracles, and they're great, but they don't repent. And he like he says, "Woe to you, entire city." It's not just like the chosen people or whatever, right? It's like it's structural. And I think that's really something to consider living in the United States. It's not looking good for us.
Yeah. Well, All right, so let's see. If we thought about charity in a kind of structural way, I think we've been able to expand the category out, at least in such a way with Pope Francis's help, that we could kind of see charity as being about the structural side of things as well. If we could maybe bring in the almsgiving piece a little bit more too, I think that it can help us expand our understanding of almsgiving by the same token. So, when I think of almsgiving, I think of discrete individual actions most of the time, giving money to a person on the street, sharing a meal with somebody who isn't going to eat that day or whatever it might be, or even maybe donating to people who are on the ground zero of all that kind of stuff, right? Soup kitchens and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's good and important. Like we keep saying, don't mean to dissuade anybody from doing those things, participating in those things. I think Christians have an obligation to do all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, I don't know, sometimes Marxists complain a lot about like people even participating in charities. And on the one hand, like I kind of get it because it's true. We let the state off the hook, for example, when we allow charities to fill in the gaps. But at the same time, we know the state is not going to fill in the gaps. So you got to catch people or they're just going to fall. Anyway, side note. But when we think about almsgiving, I think it's also helpful to try to see what that looks like in a broader sense too, right? So it can mean, I think, things like what I was talking about with development and peace, finding kind of solidarity organizations that are capable of literally rerouting money and capital and funds from the global north back to the global south or to, exploited peoples around the world. I think that is kind of a structural almsgiving piece. But even more general, maybe it's helpful to think of almsgiving for me as kind of contributing to that broader charity piece Pope Francis talks about, building structural change, contributing to actual structural change. And that goes to the kind of second half of the episode. How can money be a force for good, or how can we kind of think about pooling our money as people who want a better world to build the institutions we need to get there. So Matt, I'm going to give it over to you. What can we do? What can we do to give alms for structural change?
Right. So I think that there is, on the left generally, maybe because of what we talked about last week about temptation and power and all these kinds of ideas, but I think on the left generally, this is probably not true for everybody, but again, generally speaking, there's a sort of fear of money. There's a fear of power. There's a fear of having power and like even knowing what to do with it. I think that exists. That's my critique that I'm bringing. I guess I've seen it in people and the way that they have resisted, I don't know, building more power or really seizing a moment. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that's not too hot of a take. But anyways, that being the case, though, like you need money to do those types of things. You need money to pay for organizers. You need money to pay for all of the tools that organizers need to use. Action Network, it's not free. You got to pay for it. You got to pay someone to write those fancy emails that people get to tell you when to show up. You got to pay people to run your live streams. You got to pay people to, I don't know, go take pictures. You got to pay people to liaise with the police and lawyers and everything else. Man, a social movement is expensive stuff for sure. It doesn't come for free. And social movements, political movements, political organizations, however they look, they need not only your time and your energy as a volunteer and someone to show up, but also they desperately need money to like make sure that they can do the work they're doing. And dang, it is so much. So I don't know, when you are part of a union and you pay union dues, for example, that is something that helps your union continue organizing other people. I mean, and if they aren't doing that, if they're not organizing other people, then you need to start organizing your union. Organizing is always sort of the key, I think, at the end of the day, but sort of a panacea for all things, I suppose. But that's it. That's maybe one way that structural change, that's one way that we can think of like almsgiving or charity in terms of structural change, right? Exploitative jobs are very bad. How do you make them better? Even like, or how would you even build power to start transforming those relationships? Unionizing your workplace, paying your union dues, and getting the work done, right? That's at least one way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, it's really easy when you are excited about the left and I guess, excited about delinking from all the very bad things in society to also drop out of kind of understanding the nuts and bolts of how things go together because, you're understandably, I mean, in my own life, I'll just speak in the first person, I guess. I think, I can understand why at a certain time in my life, I was kind of really suspicious of institutions in general. Just thought they were not probably useful, all too compromised, all that kind of stuff. But I think the more you do get into organizing, the more you find that, whoa, actually, you could really use the help of an institution. You could use the help of like a lot of people who, have training and understand what they're doing. And you could use people who are on a payroll even. I think there's some danger to transforming organizations into, staff organizations rather than volunteer or member-led organizations. But at the same time, I think anybody who's ever been involved in organizing can tell you, like, at a certain point, it really helps to have a staff person around that you can count on to, be there and be paid to be there. So I think that is huge for sure. I think also, I used to teach this class on prison abolition. And one of the big points that I tried to drive home in the first half of the class is that prisons are kind of everywhere in our brains. Like, they're not just places people go. They're also things on TV. They are part of the music that we listen to. They're part of the stories that we tell about ourselves and others, whether we've been to prison or not. And it creates this sense, I heard it even from my students, this sense of almost like, okay, this is too overwhelming. Like, a sense of powerlessness. Yeah. But I said, the good news about it is because it's everywhere, you can also intervene at so many different points and like basically be doing something meaningful, right? So for some people, that is building a members-led people's organization and so on. But for other people, it is doing cultural work, right? Thinking like an abolitionist about how to write a story or how to, create a film or TV show or something, or how to make different kinds of media and so on. And I think about that a lot in terms of financially supporting things as well, whether it's anybody from an artist who's trying to sort of imagine the world differently to, in my case, having spent a long time in journalism, supporting publications that I think are doing a good job, especially G's Magazine.
Specifically that one.
But,
yeah.
Specifically G's, but tossing money at those kinds of efforts where people really are working hard to do something different, to imagine a world, to kind of create more openings than we had before. I think it's important to think through, what does almsgiving look like when we're trying to invest in what we need to actually get to structural change?
Totally. I mean, you can't underestimate, I think, actually how important the cultural production side of things is. I mean, I know that, culture is not politics, specifically speaking. They're two different things. But like when you show up at a political rally or whatever, it's powerful when you have good graphics. It's great when you have cool signs and chants and great songs and whatever. These days I've been working with the Poor People's Campaign, and that's something that they really do value in their like organization and mobilization efforts is making sure that there are people there to sing the movement songs that need to be sung. I was watching, this is neither here nor there really, but I was watching the live stream of this march the other day that was in Ohio, and people like up and down this march were singing the song about going into the rich man's house and taking what they stole. And like, oh yeah, all right. I don't know. Anyways, so there's this aspect in which that like, money that you can spend to make sure that like actual countercultural maybe and politically motivated art exists and it is there where people need to see it is pretty good. It's well spent. It has power. It's an organizing tool if nothing else. Or even people like, I mean, whenever I think of art in general, I think of Ben Wildflower because he is like he's a great artist. He's amazing. He has really like funny and interesting and moving art, and I think that it's worth like giving money to him to keep making it. It's important. I don't know. Everyone shares that wild picture of Mary and with the Magnificast, and I think it's great. I think that it's a great organizing tool, and you can't have a movement without that kind of stuff, and like people need money to make it. So I don't know. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, even speaking on a personal note, right, on this podcast, we have a Patreon and people support it. And for a long time, I was like teetering on the edge of unemployment as I was cobbling together like 30 different jobs that I was doing. And it made a real difference to me even to be able to like set aside time to do a podcast because I knew that there would be money coming into it if I made the time to do it. And like, I don't know, if I never made anything off of it, would I have done it for as many years as we've done it? Probably not. Like the material conditions of my life wouldn't have allowed me to do that, right, for a long time. And I think it's important to recognize that, like, everybody's capacity is different, and organizations also have kind of different needs, some more and less, individuals too, all that kind of stuff. I think it's important not to like shame people into spending money. That's like discourse that happens on Twitter a lot. It really bothers me. But at the same time, it's like, we will get the institutions that we are willing to fund as poor and working people. And like you said at the top of the episode, Matt, like, the right is well organized and they have more money than us, right? They can throw $1 million in the garbage can to try to make Jesus the biggest brand in your city.
And it'd be stupid.
And like, yeah, exactly. And ineffective and not good. And like, we will never be able to do that, right? We'll be lucky to get $100 million to do anything meaningful in terms of like building, a real society that works for poor and working people. And I think at least on this side of, who's owning the means of production, one day when working people have it, we'll be able to do whatever we want. But it's important to, in this kind of shell of capitalism, just be building up those kinds of institutions that we want, that we need.
Totally. I mean, there's a pretty... here's another slogan, I guess, for the podcast. You only get what you're organized to take. The gist of it being that, like, do you want a different world? Then you have to be organized in order to take it. You have to be organized in such a way where you could actually win, where you can actually make changes. And of course, it doesn't mean all at once or whatever, but it means like transformational changes that you can actually have control over, like organizing your workplace or, organizing the tenants in your building or whatever. I mean, organizing the people that ride the bus with you, organizing whatever. But you can only get victories that you're actually organized to take, and to do that, you need money. And I don't know. I don't want this to be like a shill for a bunch of different organizations that I do like myself, but like I don't know. At the end of the day, that's what it has to be. And maybe not giving money, maybe giving your time, maybe giving your attention, maybe posting online about it, which is, maybe the bare minimum too. But all of those things are really important. And none of this is getting done without people doing the work. So listen, if you're crazy about socialism, if you love to hash the debates out between the Sino-Soviet split or whatever, and you think that Mikhail Gorbachev was a revisionist, I don't really care that much about those things. I mean, they're interesting, I suppose. It's great. I love history. But people need to do the work more than anything, or else it's all for naught.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, almsgiving, if you have the means, you got to give it. Alms posting, if you can make the posts, you can give those too, I guess. But alms posting for sure. But I think, the moral of the story, I guess, is we were talking earlier about like expanding that view of charity to say, yeah, on the one hand, you can give to an individual, but also you want to create the conditions where it doesn't make sense to say that people are hungry, right? That they need help to get food and so on. And the thing of it is, like Pope Francis was saying, okay, you could help somebody across the river or you could build a bridge. They're both acts of charity. I think it's the same thing here, right? Like you can talk about like, you can directly help somebody get housing or something like that, or directly help someone get food. But at the end of the day, you also have to be investing in institutions that are going to be capable of pressuring our cities to be able to demand a radical housing program, right? Or to force people's hands, force our economy's hands when it comes to doing something different. Obviously, it's a big long-term goal, but you're not going to get there without investing real capital into it, and people have more and less of it to give, more skills maybe and less of them to give, but trying to square those kind of things during Lent, I think, has been really helpful for me. Trying to think about like, yeah, I want to carry some change around on purpose to give to people that I see on the street, but also I got to think about how to create a world where people don't need to be on the street.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast, or you can give us an alms posting on Apple Podcasts. Give us an alms posting of 5 stars. Drop your 5 stars in the bucket, please.
An alms
rating. Everything that you do for us specifically is an alms something, and we appreciate it. Our intro music is by Mario Armstrong. Our outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. And we'll see you next week for another Alms episode.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.